Hello and welcome to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiege, live today on April 24th, a day before the NFL draft starts. I have a lot of draft content to cover on today's episode, but before I do that, on the first segment, I want to talk about Jerry Jones and his most recent comments on the contracts around Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb, and Micah Parsons, and why that is all being held up at the moment. Later on, we're going to talk about the Steelers and their pre-draft press conference that was held on Monday. Then we can get into all the Eagles talk around the draft, trying to trade up, as well as where Bo Nix and Michael Penix sit right now in terms of where they're looking to get drafted. All of that is coming on today's episode, so make sure to like, follow, and subscribe to the show. And before I start on the first segment, I'd like to remind you guys, if you have any questions or comments, to please use the tip and donations link you see on your screen, gsmcpodcast.net. Using that link makes it easier for me to see your questions pop up in my chat box. I could read it on air, and that way carry on the conversation, just get your guys' perspective on anything. It's a big help for this show, as well as all the other shows across the network, and we always appreciate it a lot whenever you guys are able to use that link, which is, once again, gsmcpodcast.net. In saying that, before actually I jump into this first segment on Jerry Jones, I just want to say quickly beforehand, on my way here, some breaking news that dropped before. If you didn't see Adam Schefter or other reporters, insiders talk on it, just briefly here, Trey Hendrickson from the Cincinnati Bengals and T. Higgins, again, technically, requested a trade away from the Cincinnati Bengals, starting with Trey Hendrickson, one part of their star duo tandem that they have there with Hubbard. He requested a trade, mostly just for financial reasons, as Adam Schefter reported. He is due to make $15 million, and he values himself more than that. And really, there hasn't been any negotiations on that part, so he's requested a trade. And T. Higgins has requested a trade again. He did so before, but he did it again now, recently, because ever since just about a year ago, there haven't been any negotiations on his contract. So he's asked once again to be traded. And I just wanted to get that out there. I won't make it a whole segment, but it is pretty significant for the Bengals that we're gearing up to have a big year. But with sudden moves like this, it could all just really affect everything. I don't expect the Bengals to trade both of them, but it is out there. They have requested trades, so it is something to monitor as the offseason goes on, and maybe how it affects the draft here coming up tomorrow. But in saying that, we can get into Jerry Jones and what they said recently, talking with ESPN and The Athletic yesterday. They were asked about the contract negotiations and really what's holding it up, why is it going so slow, and where do they stand with Dak and CeeDee mostly, because those are the ones that are really coming down to the wire now this year or next year. The Cowboys have to make a decision. And oddly enough, when they asked Jerry Jones about it, the biggest issue just really has been the lack of movement and not really seeing anything happen up to this point. You've heard Dak say nothing's happened, and Jerry Jones really doesn't seem too concrete on it. So they asked him about it, and Jerry Jones said, if you've got trouble with when the timing is around here, it's because I'm not ready to go. He said that to ESPN, and that first off, was pretty alarming to me, I guess, just because I wouldn't expect Jerry Jones to say that. Everybody thinks it's all these external factors with Dak and the contracts, and I'm sure a lot of people would point to any other reasons why this contract wouldn't be moving as it should. But Jerry Jones said it really just comes down to him not really being ready to come to a concrete decision as of now. I'm sure it'll speed up more after the draft, but for right now, he's saying basically that he's not ready to commit to anything right now, and really just in no rush, it seems, the way he answered that question. And going on with the rest of the interview and more on what Jerry Jones said to expand on this first initial quote, he went on to say, "You may be working on contracts, not moving anything but your eyebrows. Who in the world would think that we're not working on it? I work on it. It pops up at 2 in the morning sometimes. What you're actually questioning is why don't you have something done and negotiated and put in the drawer? Well, we'd like to see some more leaves fall. We'd like to see some more action." And that one, saying that, coming from Jerry Jones, pretty honest response in the first statement and this one where he continued on. It makes sense, with contracts, just in layman's terms, there is a lot of reading and going over things and making sure everything's all right, and you're not actually physically moving or doing anything, but you are still progressing and understanding everything more and more, and it takes a long time, as business does, as these contract situations do with players. But the most interesting part about this whole thing for me was that he said he'd want to see more action, more things happen before he could really move on with this. And it just makes you think in CD's terms. It makes you think of all the other receivers. Just today, you saw Amon-Ra St. Brown get a contract extension. Now he's the highest paid receiver in the NFL. That's some movement. That's something that will affect CD's contract. I'm sure he's going to monitor how Jamar Chase, who the Bengals just picked up his fifth-year option, so that benefits the Cowboys in a way. They don't feel rushed. Say the Bengals gave Jamar Chase a massive contract today as well. Very early, but it could have happened. If they did do that, it would be more pressure on the Cowboys. And I'm sure they're going to still wait to see what Justin Jefferson does with his contract and how the Vikings handle that. With Justin Jefferson, I'm sure trying to be the highest paid wide receiver now, not only does he have to eclipse Tyreek Hill, he now has to try and eclipse Amon-Ra St. Brown, who just took over that spot from Tyreek Hill. So the longer you wait, the more expensive it could become. And that's what's just so confusing to me. Waiting longer doesn't seem to pan out for the Cowboys in any way. Just if CD, it just feels like CD's going to drive the price up more if the roof, the ceiling of it just keeps climbing higher and higher. I expect it to with Jefferson, so that's where I stand on that, on what Jerry Jones said and just how he feels about it. And even more so on that part, on seeing more reactions and seeing more action coming from these contracts. Stephen Jones also talked about it on Tuesday in a media availability session, and he touched on CD and Jamar Chase as well by saying, "You don't think the representatives of Jefferson and CD and Jamar Chase aren't talking? You don't think they got their eyes on something really big? Please. They're not ready to come in here. Same thing with Micah, same thing with Dak. It's a little cat and mouse, and total respect for them." Just adding on to the point, really with what Jerry Jones has alluded to and has talked about with CD, Jamar. I'm sure their representatives talk to each other, trying to see how they can get these teams to try and give their representatives, their clients, I should say, the best offer with the most guarantees and really just what benefits them. Not like they haven't earned it, like they're trying to pull a fast one on these teams, but they're all just trying to see what could work out best for all of them, because I'm sure most people would classify Jefferson, CD, and Jamar in that same tier of number one stud wide receivers. You can't name many more other than Tyreek Hill maybe and Devontae Adams that would go above these three, CD, Jamar, and Jefferson. Amon-Ra St. Brown just got his contract, and that's great. He deserved it. In all honesty, I didn't think he would get that much money, but the Lions value him. You saw how important he was to his team. Now he got maybe even more than he would have expected, but that's sort of what happens when you wait this long to try and figure something out. And I can almost guarantee Justin Jefferson is going to want the exact amount as Amon-Ra St. Brown, or definitely more. You have some time there with Chase, but CeeDee Lamb, I can't imagine him asking for much less than 28, probably the lowest, or $29 million per year. And that's something they have to work out, and it's something that leads you into this next topic that Jerry Jones talked about and sort of acknowledged and submitted to, in a way of admitting, with the contracts of Dak, with the contracts of CeeDee Lamb, it might be great for them if they're able to get all this money, but you have to pull it from somewhere else, and that's where the biggest problem lies. If you pay 3 players the maximum amount of money that they want, they've earned, great, they get their money, you keep them, they're great players, but you have to start taking bits and pieces from your defense, your offensive line, just a bunch of pieces on the defensive side of the ball, your edge rushers, your linebackers, anything that goes along with that. If you have good players there, you're going to have to take away from their money, essentially, to pay some of these guys, and that's where the decision-making comes in. That's where everything gets a bit tricky, and you have to make some of these tough decisions, which they have made, getting rid of a lot of pieces on their offensive line. And just really everywhere else on the team, running back is an issue. Wide receiver, other than CeeDee, who else do you really have? Jerry Jones acknowledged that, and, it is something that he has to consider. He talked about it. He said, Dak has enjoyed in his career that we're so proud of, some of the best supporting cast that you could put around him. To move forward, we will have to diminish that. That's a fact. That's the rules. That's our challenge. And to make it work out, Dak as a quarterback of the Dallas Cowboys, I don't think even I have to think twice about that. Supporting Dak Prescott in one hand, but also acknowledging that it does come with a bit of a sacrifice, really, with the Cowboys if they want to go all in on Dak and get him this money that they surely support. He said in his statement that he's so proud of Dak. He wants to keep Dak. Later in that interview is what he said. So if you really think he's the guy, yes, give him his money, but it will come at a cost. And that's where I think a lot of people start to diverge on where they fall in trying to pay Dak, not trying to pay Dak. Who do you sacrifice, CeeDee, Micah, or Dak? It's an extremely tough position for the Cowboys, and you do want to wait, you do want to think about it and really consider all your options, but you don't really have time on your side, which is the biggest point I'm trying to make, with everybody else sort of jumping the gun, jumping in front of you in negotiations and getting all of their dirty work done before, training camp OTA starts to, wipe it away and stop thinking about it. With the Cowboys, because they have so many tough decisions to make now, how to still improve and compete in the NFC that's just getting better, it's a weird spot where they find themselves. Not a lot of positives that they can pull out of this. The draft is certainly going to help to try and replenish this with younger, cheaper, most of all, deals that they can work in. But I don't expect them drafting a quarterback like some people have mentioned. They're not going to draft a wide receiver in case CeeDee leaves. Micah's not walking out the door. It's hard when you have this level of talent and still trying to be competitive. That's why it's such an impressive merit when the Chiefs stay so good for a while, or with the Patriots, or even with the 49ers trying to keep all their players together. That's why it's so impressive. And the Cowboys are trying to do that, but I just think along the way they've taken some missteps that have cost them now more than ever, with that deal to Dak, not extending him when they should have a year before, waiting this long with CeeDee Lamb when he became extension eligible last year, if not the year before. Waiting this long does come with its downfalls, and now the Cowboys have to try and maneuver around it. We'll see where they go from here. I don't think they can wait much longer, but again, they like to do things their way, so we'll see how they end up more so after the draft when all this attention on the draft has gone by. But we'll leave it at that. In the meantime, we'll continue on with the show. We're going to go to a quick break right now, and on the other side, we're going to talk about the Pittsburgh Steelers and some of the takeaways I got from their pre-draft press conference on Monday, talking about quarterbacks, wide receivers, and what the draft is looking like with some rumors floating around out there. So stick around, more to come on today's episode of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on their face shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. Now talking about the Pittsburgh Steelers and where they stand on everything. After a pretty busy free agent period, you could look at this team and think, like, wow, they addressed a lot of stuff. They brought in quarterbacks, completely reshuffled their quarterback room, getting rid of Kenny, Mason Rudolph, and Mitchell Trubisky, bringing in Russell Wilson and Justin Fields, most of all, on one-year deals, but still, it can't get worse at the quarterback position, really on the whole offensive side of the ball than it was last year. So those were improvements. They brought in Patrick Queen on the defensive side of the ball as well. And all of that to add on to Deshaun Elliott as well coming in, bringing in a new punter as well, all shuffling in and getting rid of some other players that really just didn't make the cut and weren't falling in line with what the Steelers had in mind. They did a lot of chores in the offseason to try and get to this point. They cleared up a lot of space in salary cap, as well. So it doesn't feel like this team has many needs right now as it has had in previous years. And Mike Tomlin and Omar talked about it at their pre-draft press conference. It was something that was brought up to Mike Tomlin answering one of the first questions on how to address positions heading into the draft. What are they targeting? Do they feel that they need a position more so over the other? And he basically responded with, we've been very active in free agency, and that makes you really comfortable as you lean in on draft weekend. We've addressed a lot of needs, so don't feel overly thirsty in any particular area. Just basically recapping what I just said. With free agency, it is out of the norm for the Steelers, in all honesty, to be that active in free agency, at least in recent years, towards the tail end of their previous general manager's tenure there, Kevin Colbert. They were never really one of the bigger buyers in free agency, splashing a good amount of money on Patrick Queen. If I'm not mistaken, he was or is now one of the highest paid linebackers, or one of their most expensive deals in free agency that the Steelers have made. So that's pretty uncommon. Not only signing Russell Wilson, that seemed like it was going to happen, but just I think a week or that weekend that followed, the signing of Russell Wilson, going out, being proactive and trading for Justin Fields, that was also out of character. And it's something that I never understood why the Steelers weren't more active in free agency, especially when some of their players were getting older. They were in a transition period after Ben. Salary cap, all that stuff, and being restricted by that is understandable, but they were never really in such a bad situation. They were always just signing players on minimum deals, not too many splash plays, and not that you need big signings in free agency, but it certainly does help when you're trying to win now, really most of all with the Steelers, trying to be one of the top contenders. You've been floating around that area for a while now. People, fans, most of all, are wanting to see you get over that hump, so that's a big positive for them so far. And also, later on in that press conference, talking about the draft, and at pick 20, if you follow any sort of reports on the Steelers, any sort of talk around the draft, at pick 20, it is as much of a toss-up as any position or any draft spot in this year's draft, because it's just almost right in the middle of everything, and it is too late for some of the top corners, possibly some of the top offensive linemen. A bit too early to go for wide receiver, and also too late because Odunze, Neighbors, and Harrison are all probably the top three. And if you're not getting one of them, it doesn't drop off tremendously, but you're not going to want to reach on one at 20, so that almost crosses that out, you'd think. I'll get to that more in a second, but it really, at this point, falls to offensive line, but I expect the best offensive lineman to go make a run from as early as 13 or 12 all the way to about potentially 16 with the Seahawks. So that's about 4 to 5 offensive linemen potentially off the board, and then do you want to try and draft one of them? On the thought about trading back, because of everything that I outlined, Omar Khan had a very distinct opinion about it. He said, "In my opinion, you never trade away from a good player, but obviously, if there's ever a scenario where it makes sense for both sides, it's something we will look at, we'll listen." And it doesn't sound like the most convincing answer if you think there's any chance of trading down. It sounds like there's no intention to trade down at this moment. It seems like teams will have to really come with an offer that they can't refuse. Similar to yesterday when we talked about the Los Angeles Chargers and their general manager, Joe Ortiz, talking about how they're approaching trading down or how they're going to handle their number 5 overall pick. They were really honest about it and saying, we're not moving unless we get the better end of the deal because it's so valuable. They expect it to be that way. It sounds the same with the Steelers, just not as much conviction as Joe Ortiz put it. And I mentioned the wide receiver position before and how I would touch on it just in a little bit. One of the most interesting pieces around the wide receivers, and it's no secret that the Steelers have been inquiring about receivers in the offseason, in free agency. You've heard Tyler Boyd be connected with them, Brandon Ayuk, Mike Williams. After Deontay Johnson was traded, it is realistic to see that position now be of interest, of need for them. You can't just go into a season, in my opinion, with George Pickens, Calvin Austin. They brought in Van Jefferson as well as Quez Watkins, but you definitely need more, especially in an AFC North filled with great defenses. You're going to need more on offense. Even T. Higgins to an extent as well, being interested in him and being connected with him in some aspect, there is that. And the idea around the wide receivers and the Steelers so far is an interesting one because it has started to gain a bit more traction as it's gone on. And Mike Tomlin actually talked about it, how their wide receiver room is stacking up, how he is looking at it from this standpoint, and he said pretty satisfied with it. He likes the trajectory of the group on and off the field, but you're getting contrasting reports from pretty reliable sources in some way, specifically from Dane Brugler, a draft analyst for The Athletic, recently told the Yahoo Fantasy Football Show a few days ago that if he, meaning Brian Thomas, the wide receiver from LSU, if he doesn't go off the board before pick 20, I do think this might be the floor for him. I've heard the Steelers love Brian Thomas. Everyone wants them to take another character follower on day 2. My impression of the Steelers is that they're kind of sick of that. I think they'd love to just hit a home run with a guy like Brian Thomas in the first round. That was Dane Brugler from The Athletic talking about it, citing some sources and his feeling around it as well. He mentioned character follower in there. To explain that a bit more, there's always some receivers, not just receivers, but other positions as well with players that they'll seemingly drop for some reason, for off-the-field issues, for character issues, character faller. They fall because there is questions about stuff unrelated to football, and it just puts teams off a little bit, cautions them to drafting them, and by doing that, some of them fall. A lot has been mentioned like that with George Pickens, and you saw it in some instances this year. He had some fallouts on the sidelines. He didn't look pretty. He didn't look great. He is a great talent, but he fell all the way to the second round, you could say, because of that. The Steelers have been known with some of those wide receivers and being connected to them, trying to change them and kind of trying to corral them. We're going to have to see how George Pickens develops, and according to Dane Brugler, he feels like they're tired of that, and drafting Brian Thomas, in perspective, just in general, thinking about it, you can't go wrong with him. Brian Thomas is a great receiver out of LSU. I think if he was by himself, he would have been gaining a lot more attention, but because you have a guy like Malik Neighbors, it works two ways. You benefit a lot because the attention goes to him a good amount of the time, but also so much attention is on him that not a lot of people really, really get to study you and really get to know how good of a player you are. I think he's a great player. I think he has a chance to be a lower tier wide receiver 1, but it's a good thing for the Steelers that they already have George Pickens there. But the question now becomes, drafting him at 20, is that getting the best value that you can for him at that spot? It is an interesting debate. I haven't heard too much, if at all, about wide receivers in the first. Really, it all has been filled up with centers, offensive tackles, and, that has always been the story so far with the Steelers, shoring up that offensive line because they want to run the ball. That has seemed to be the most popular of the whole situations, but drafting wide receiver, again, it is tough because of the talent. You need one. But it all comes down to value, really, at the end of the day. With Mike Tomlin saying something, it could just be another smokescreen, trying to distract their true intentions. You can't really trust anybody at this point in the draft when they're talking about something. So all of that, mentioning that, plus offensive line still being in need. If I were to make a decision, I don't think I'm buying that because I think it's just too early. If you're going to go with him, I think you might as well just trade down. I believe he'll still be there. But most of all, offensive line, center seems to be the biggest needs because they just don't have a center, a natural player of that position on their team right now. That seems to be the biggest need to me. They could have some other guard or offensive lineman to play center, but it's not the same as having somebody naturally to do that, to call out the plays and really be an anchor in there for the offensive line. And history's not also on their side. The last time Pittsburgh drafted a wide receiver was in 2006. Santonio Holmes around this same pick at 25. So it could be a wide receiver. It's a good idea, but the Steelers haven't done it in a while, and they have other positions of needs where the recent trend has been going in the second round. So I'm not really buying it right now, but I wouldn't be surprised if the Steelers try to make a move, try to see what's out there. If they can move up towards the top 10 and try their luck out there, maybe, but you don't want to take that big of a risk in the draft. And I just think it's safer for them, more Steeler-like, to just sit and wait and try and get a player that you hold high up on your board. But, again, you never really know with the NFL draft how it all pans out. That's where the Steelers lie right now. Those were my biggest takeaways on that. So, in the meantime, we'll put a pin on that conversation and we'll move on to another break in today's show. we're going to focus more on the draft after this break, talking about the Eagles, another team that's looking to make moves as they recently have in the draft, trying to move up from their 22 overall pick. I'll touch more on that after the break, and where Michael Penix and Bo Nix are sort of being mentioned to land in the NFL draft as well. So stick around, a lot more to talk about in just a few seconds. Don't go anywhere.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Back here on the show to continue talking about the NFL draft, just a day away now from the first round starting. We're going to focus on the Philadelphia Eagles, a team that has been known, has a reputation of moving all over the draft, talking Howie Roseman and all his activities, trying to do the most, it seems, always trying to move up, trying to improve this team any way he can, and it has become almost like a tradition at this point for him to try and make a move. You saw it with A.J. Brown in recent years. Just in the last 5 drafts, he's moved up, traded up, and selected players like Andre Dillard in 2019, moved up to draft Devontae Smith, Jordan Davis in 2022, and most recently Jalen Carter in 2023. 4 out of the last 5 drafts, he has moved up. So it is just normal to think he would try and do that again here in this draft, and that's what ESPN's Adam Schefter claims to be the case once again with Howie Roseman. Could be one of the most aggressive teams to move up in pursuing a deal, were Adam Schefter's words. One report that has gained the most momentum revolves around the Eagles trying to trade up to draft a defensive back. That's what Adam Schefter claims, and specifically in his last report on all the notes he has gained up to this point on the draft, he said, if Roseman wants a cornerback at number 22, as many people around the league would believe he might have to move up again. Per sources, he already has been calling around, gouging what a trade might look like to be prepared for what has become a near annual tradition. Also mentioned that Howie Roseman has never actually drafted a defensive back, running back, tight end, or safety ever in the first round. He has been the general manager since 2010, and just off of that information, thinking about it, with all the movement, it is pretty crazy to think he has never drafted those positions, and now could be the first time, with the focus seeming to be on defensive back. I mentioned all the moves they've made before and how that could affect it, and you look at the defensive backs, that's another position in this class that is of low quantity in the first round, just because, at least to me, in my evaluation, in my opinion on these draft picks, you really have 2 that I would class as must-have, immediate starters, immediate contributors. That's Alabama's Terrion Arnold and Toledo's Quinyon Mitchell. Terrion Arnold, very solid season for Alabama, and Quinyon Mitchell, a senior, had a good season, not as many favorable stats as Terrion Arnold, but he had a very solid pro day, very good combine as well. He tested great, and now they're seemingly looked at as a 1A, 1B sort of positions at, or players in that position. You can't really go wrong with either of them. About the same measurements and height, weight, and all that stuff. Both ran very good 40s. They match up very well with each other, so those are really the ones that have stuck out and separated themselves more so than any other one, I believe, over this part of the offseason. And it makes sense why Howie Roseman would want to go after a defensive back now, because you look at their secondary, you look at what they've addressed so far, right, in the offseason. Offense, Saquon Barkley tying down Jordan Mailata, Landon Dickerson. Jalen Hurts is signed through 2028, 2027. Devontae Smith also received a new deal. You have everything on offense to move forward, so you've locked that down. Looking now further at that defense, how does that stack up? How much better has it gotten since last year, where that was the clear deficiency of the entire team? Couldn't really stop the run against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and really just failing to live up to the defense that we saw a year prior to that when they made their Super Bowl run. Of course, Fletcher Cox, Brandon Graham got older, but it really wasn't the units up front that caused any doubt or anything like that. It was mostly a lot coming in the back end from a lack of good safety play. They had Reed Blankenship back there. He was a solid piece, but to me, it was a bit too early for him to make an impact. You look at Darius Slay, solid, probably their best secondary player. And you look at the other side, and James Bradberry was one of the biggest culprits, one of the biggest receivers of a lot of criticism by a lot of fans, a lot of people that watch the game. The two biggest games that stand out to me were the Seahawks game. If you remember, Seahawks, Eagles in a close game. I want to say it was Monday Night Football, and the Seahawks were trailing. They were on a game-winning drive. They were trying to win the game, and a lot of those throws went James Bradberry's direction, most notably the game-winning touchdown over-the-shoulder catch to Jackson Smith and Jigba on James Bradberry, and they targeted him a lot during that drive. That was a bad look, but as a corner, the saying is always, short memory, forget about plays, because those are going to happen, right? But it just never seemed to, for all the bad performances, bad looks Bradberry got, he never had great performances, a great interception, a great tackle, or really anything to kind of contemplate or kind of trying to erase those negative plays with some bad plays, kind of offset them. Those never really came, as opposed to when they made the Super Bowl run. It was just a rough season up and down for Bradberry and that secondary overall. And you look at them as well, Bradberry and Darius Slay are both 30 years old or older. So that, again, doesn't play into your favor. You look at everybody else that you have in there, Eli Ricks, Kelly Ringo, all younger guys, and sure, they can get better, but just from what you saw last year, you're not really too confident in what they could bring this next year, because they don't have any momentum going. They didn't finish off the year strong. They didn't really make any wow plays, so they don't have much to really build off of. And it's kind of like, not to say that the first year was a waste, because they certainly learned some things off the field that are helpful, but on the field, it's not something that they gained a ton of experience with and can build off of. They're almost starting from a similar position to a rookie if you were to draft them in now, which is what they're planning to do. So sure, you can get a bigger talent, a greater talent than those other guys who weren't drafted in the first round, but it's going to be almost a similar stance on starting some of these younger guys anyway. You don't really know what you have in them up till now, so it looks like the Eagles are dead set on trying to improve that secondary. There are some other options out there as well, with these young pieces being the alternatives to Darius Slay and Bradberry. You could go out and try and test your luck with a Justin Simmons if you want another player back there. I know they just got C.J. Gardner-Johnson back, but he could be a guy that you could sign for a year or two. Of course, you look back at the Kevin Byard deal that didn't work out. Similar circumstance, similar situation to what I'm proposing, but you have such a young secondary that, yeah, one situation turned out bad with Byard, but you can't assume that that's just going to happen again. I think Justin Simmons at this point is a little bit better, has a higher ceiling than Kevin Byard right now at his point in his career. And if you sign him for a year or two on a cheaper deal, which is the biggest point because Justin Simmons has a very expensive contract, if you could get it lowered down and bring him in, I think that'll certainly help. Stephon Gilmore is still out there, another veteran option. So you'd think, why would you go out and get an older player if Bradbury and Darius Slay are also over 30? That's a good point, but again, I think it would be a good transition is what I'm basically trying to say, which is my biggest point. Bringing in another veteran guy, again, for a year or two, having these younger players spot them here or there, gain some more experience. Because they didn't see so much of the field last year, I think could really benefit this team to improve with the veteran guys coming in for a little bit, then moving on from them, then transitioning into some of these younger guys with more experience. I think that's a route that they could explore, and if they decide to go through with this trade and move up that far and get one of these corners, who, if I had to pick, if I'm Howie Roseman, right, and I make the trade, I'm feeling good, I'm up there, at one of these picks from 12 with the Broncos or as far as 13 or 14, I would assume. If I'm picking, who am I taking? I would probably take Terrion Arnold if I had to pick between one of them. I think his game is a bit more polished. I think he moves in and out of his cuts, of his breaks a bit easier, in my opinion, than Quinyon Mitchell. I also think he just has, in simple terms, layman's terms, I think catching the ball, I think he's a lot more secure with it, more prone to actually completing a turnover, which is important. Quinyon Mitchell gets in those spots, but a lot of times it'll be a swat or not finishing a turnover. And I don't want to get too technical, but shadowing a receiver, following him on all his cuts and just reading him, I think Terrion Arnold has a bit higher of a ceiling than Quinyon Mitchell. But I do share the feeling that, it's really 1A, 1B. It's your preference. I think Quinyon Mitchell would be better suited in a lot heavier zone coverage scheme than man, like Terrion Arnold would. And because the Eagles run so much man, because they want to have a lot of people up there in the box, they want to rush the quarterback, I think Terrion Arnold would be a better fit in Philadelphia running those zero-back, one-on-one man coverage. I think he would do a little bit better there. That's just what I feel like. And in terms of finding a trade partner, it gets interesting because to me, the three biggest candidates are the Broncos, the Raiders, and then just a little bit further down are the Colts and the Saints. It's interesting, these teams to look into, because for Indianapolis, their general manager, Chris Ballard, is known to want to accumulate draft picks and have a better opportunity with them, get more players with them. Obviously, that makes sense. More draft picks, you have more chance to draft better players. So that one could be interesting, but then you think, is that a bit too late at 15? Would Quinyon Mitchell be gone? And then at that point, you might have to trade back to where you were or trade even further away. Something to consider. Same thing with the Saints. I think that just might be a little bit too late. The sweet spot falls with the Broncos and the Las Vegas Raiders. But with both of them, you have to consider the Raiders, first of all. They might need a corner as well. They desperately need one, opposite of Jack Jones. They don't really have too many options, so I'm sure they're going to be thinking, if one of them is there, drafting one of them. But they also need an offensive tackle. Which position do you value more? That comes down to Tom Telesco, Antonio Pierce, and what they want to do. If they trade up, that also changes everything. So they're an interesting team that I just think you have to wait and see how the top 10, how the top 8, fall, and how it all lines up before you try and reach out to them. And with the Denver Broncos, another one that is probably the most likely situation because they need a lot of players. They don't have a lot of draft picks. those two things don't line up. The Eagles have 2 second-round draft picks and plus their first-round draft pick, a lot of capital they could offer the Broncos. It would make the most sense, but people would connect the Broncos to Bo Nix, to Michael Penix perhaps. They just signed Zach Wilson, and I mentioned it yesterday. With Zach Wilson, I think it's in their best interest to try him out and see what you got. But, Sean Payton, what they're thinking over there with their general manager, George Patton, and everything. Do they still go out there? I'm going to talk about it more in the next segment. But to wrap up this one, I think it would just make the most sense for the Broncos there to go out and make that trade. It'll sting because you don't know what you have in Zach Wilson, but if you get, say, the Eagles' first-round pick and maybe 1 or 2 of their second-round picks, I think it's a no-brainer for what the value you're getting back, and it'll speed up this rebuilding process you're in. I think they're the most suitable trade partner, but again, it all depends on really how the top 4 fall out, how everything lines up. It's in their best interest, and if they can get a fair deal, I'm sure the Broncos would do it. The Eagles would want to do it anyway, so that's something to watch out for tomorrow night as the draft goes along. But in the meantime, we will move on to the final segment, the final break of the show as well. And we'll be back in a few seconds to talk about Bo Nix and Michael Penix. A lot of attention has gone to the top 4, but these two could make a certain impact depending on where they fall. It just depends on who's going to draft them. I'm going to let you know more on what's being said after this break, so don't go anywhere. More to come on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. Last segment of the show, the last segment before we're officially on draft day, the first day of the draft. So we're going to talk about some of the quarterbacks, of course, lined up in this NFL draft. Before I do that, though, I want to remind you guys one last time in this show, if you have any questions or comments throughout the show and you want to make them, bring them up, please use the tip and donations link that you see on your screen, gsmcpodcast.net. With any of those, using that link, I'm able to see your question live on air, read it on air, and interact with it, take the conversation elsewhere, and just react to it. It's a lot more conversational and engaging. I think it's a big improvement to the show, makes it more fun, in my opinion, and it's also a massive help for the show as well. So if you would, use the tip and donations link, gsmcpodcast.net. We would greatly appreciate it with any of your contributions to that. But back on the topic at hand, the final topic, Bo Nix and Michael Penix. What are we hearing about the consensus bottom 2 quarterbacks of the top 6? Everything that's coming out right now on the draft is where Jaden Daniels going to go. Where is Drake May going to fall? Is Drake May going to go ahead of Daniels? Is J.J. McCarthy going to fall in the top 4, top 2 maybe? All of them are getting shuffled and mixed and landing in different spots, and it's hard to keep track of, in all honesty, but it will continue to be shuffled around a lot up until the moment they're drafted, in all honesty, and you really know who is going where. But Michael Penix and Bo Nix are also here too, coming off of very impressive seasons, and at the start of March, it seemed like at least 5 or 6, or all 6 of these guys could go in the first round. With the Broncos, the Raiders needing quarterbacks, they could draft one. They could take them that high if they wanted to. That's what it seemed to be lining up to early in March, like I mentioned. But now you have some analysts, some people on TV, some people with sources close to any of these teams, close to the quarterbacks and the draft, saying, like Mike Florio of Pro Football Talk, he said back on Friday that Bo Nix could be the odd man out at the quarterback position to fall out of the first round in all totality. He said specifically, based on discussions with multiple sources with knowledge of the manner in which the first round is likely to unfold, the former Oregon quarterback is the most likely to slide. I would tend to agree with that, just the way I have him lined up. Of course, you have Caleb there. Everyone knows where Caleb's going. Second, I have Jaden Daniels, then J.J. McCarthy, Drake May, Michael Penix, and Bo Nix. And you look at the teams that I mentioned before, just in the last segment, with the Broncos and with the Raiders, based on their needs, I keep saying it, situation and circumstance matter for these quarterbacks. Bo Nix might not technically be a young, inexperienced person, just in general, trying to learn what it is like to play football professionally, living in a different city, living on their own, having all these things go about. He is on the older side, but again, playing in college and then playing in the NFL is different, and there's going to be a transition period for anybody. So I think too early, not having enough to back him up there in Denver, it is just not a favorable spot for any of these quarterbacks, I believe. I think anyway it would have been too early for him, and even with the Raiders as well, if they were going to get Penix or Bo Nix or whoever, they still need a corner, a tackle. I'm sure they would love to have more pass rushers outside of Christian Wilkins and Max Crosby. Maybe some more wide receivers to back up Jacoby Myers and Devontae Adams. A quarterback of all spots as well to bring in Michael Penix for that quarterback spot. I think it is a big need, but overall, it wouldn't be beneficial for them in the long run. I know you have, in both of their cases, in the same division, with the Broncos, the Raiders, the Chargers, and the Kansas City Chiefs. Of course, you look at Herbert, you look at Mahomes, you're thinking, if our guys don't live up compared to both of them, you really don't have a chance, and that pressure, I acknowledge, is huge. You have to try and match them. That's just how it is. If you don't have a talented quarterback, people don't really give you a chance. It is hard to ignore that pressure and that, attention from everything. Everybody telling you that you need a quarterback, but I don't think it's favorable. Taking the wrong one and almost not improving him along the way is even worse than skipping out on one and trying to improve the rest of your team. And whereas on Friday, Mike Miller from ESPN explained that his people, his sources from the Las Vegas Raiders, keep saying that the Las Vegas Raiders really like Penix at 13 and that the doubts are really just around his medical history and or why many have him falling. But Penix to the Las Vegas Raiders seems to be getting some more momentum. I even saw today that the Giants are also one to watch even earlier than the Las Vegas Raiders at number 6. But again, they're hesitant on it. They've done a lot of work on the quarterback position, but Michael Penix at 6, if you miss out on the top 4, if I thought 13 and 12 were early. If they're drafting him at 6, I think whoever's making the decisions there is in question, should be in question for that pick. Not because I think Michael Penix is awful. He's not bad. I really like him. I think he's very talented, but again, the Giants are not in a position right now to draft a quarterback and think they're going to be that much better. They're almost just as good as the New England Patriots, and I don't even support them drafting a quarterback either at 3. But they're in a bit more favorable spot because they have Jacoby Brissett there on a cheaper deal. I know the Giants have Daniel Jones, but they're paying him a lot of money, and you might as well make him your starter rather than drafting a quarterback, maybe playing better than Daniel Jones, and now you have a really expensive quarterback just sitting on your bench. It doesn't make too much sense with these reports. I think they're more favorable and probably better off waiting on them to fall. Past 12 and 13, you're not going to have the Saints drafting them, the Colts, the Jaguars, the Bengals, the Steelers, the Rams, all falling there between the 14 to 20 range. And then after that, all the other teams have quarterbacks as well. You don't have to feel like you have to make a move there. You get a quarterback. They're better off waiting, in my opinion. And the NFL also didn't invite Michael Penix and Bo Nix to the draft to even attend there. So that sort of tells you where they're feeling on this situation of, if they're going to go in the first round or not. There's doubts certainly around the league from what everybody's saying, what the general feelings are. If the NFL is not inviting them, you would have to think they would know something with these teams and what they're trying to do with the draft. If they're not getting invited, it's not certain, but it does certainly have to tell you something that, it's not looking favorable for these quarterbacks. Michael Penix has also been given more appreciation recently from his pro day, his journey to the national championship this past season. One AFC assistant actually claimed that the second best quarterback in the draft, just as a pure film evaluator, is Michael Penix. Those were the exact words from an AFC coach, an assistant coach. So, you have diverging opinions here with Michael Penix and everything else, but the most favorable situations are the Bears, the Commanders, and the Vikings. If any team outside of them is trying to draft a quarterback inside the top 13 picks, I'm not going to like it. That's just how I feel about it. I don't think they're ready to assume those positions, but, it'll be hard to see them not draft them at this point with what everybody else is saying, but we're just going to have to see how it works out. And just on the entire topic of Bo Nix and the Broncos and what's being said about them overall, just to wrap it up and give a closing statement here with them. There's been a lot of connection with Bo Nix and the Broncos especially. Bo Nix was on the Kate Adams show, the Up and Adams show recently as well, talking about it. He's even acknowledged that a lot of people have him going there. He would love to go there, but again, how it all falls into play, how the Broncos feel that it could fall into play. They already have a quarterback, so is it too much to go draft another one when you already have 3 on your roster? They have to plan all that out. And with Michael Penix as well, he is the one more so than Bo Nix. I think he's going to go in the first round, but before 20, I think these teams, some of them could be reaching a little bit. Again, I think he's a great quarterback, but it matters on the situation. It matters how it all lines up with these teams. They're surely in the conversation of getting drafted. If I'm saying who's going to fall out of the first round, that's probably going to be Bo Nix. I just simply think even if the Broncos also trade with the Eagles and get more picks, I think he'll still be there for any team in the second round or late first. They don't have to draft him that early, and with Michael Penix as well. If we don't see a surprise, no real team suits him after 13, so anybody can have their pick of just waiting and then buying their time to draft Michael Penix if they really want him and get more value out of him in that stand. But I would love to know what you guys think on it. Where do you stand on Bo Nix, Michael Penix? Who do you like better? Do you have them over a Drake May, a J.J. McCarthy? Do you value them higher than those quarterbacks? Put it all down in the comments below and just leave your thoughts in there as well. But in saying that, that will do it for me on today's episode of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the show, as well as following the network on Facebook, Instagram, X, and TikTok for more of the network's content. If you want to see more of me and this show, check out the GSMC Sports Network channel and the Podcast Network channel on YouTube for YouTube Shorts that are posted every day. All the live full shows are on there if you want to go back and watch a full show, or the live segment videos, individual videos of the segments. If you missed a certain segment or want to rewatch one part of a live show, they're all on there on both channels. Tune in every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time for more discussions, conversations around the NFL and the hottest topics circling around the league with me, your host, Manny Maradiaga. thanking you guys for joining me on today's episode, and I'll see you guys back here again tomorrow to talk all about the draft leading up to 8 o'clock Eastern Time to the official start of the draft.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.